Hello, welcome to Wise Up on Air. My name is Damien Kaspauer. I'm software product manager here at Audiokinetic, and I'm super excited to be here today with the team behind Flock. But before we jump into our feature presentation, let's talk about some news. Cool. First up, we're going to dig into a bit of what's been happening at Audiokinetic. We got a little bit of Wise Community Spotlight coming, along with Audiokinetic out in the community, and then followed up by our developer presentation of Flock. So stay tuned and thanks for joining us. First up, let's talk about the Wise beta and summer of beta. This summer, we've been releasing betas for the forthcoming 2024.1 version of Wise. We had a live stream with a big overview and recently released our beta 2 in the last month. And it's cool because during this summer of beta, we're able to get these features out and into people's hands while also getting feedback about them from folks in the community as they give it a try. We added a new property editor to the contextual workflow in Wise. So it's a big change that folks are giving us feedback about. That allowed us to be able to put object editors right there into the primary editor in the center focus. And one of the things that we brought out as part of beta 1 were some changes to the attenuation editor. We brought in a distance scaling percentage for objects that were subscribed to the attenuation so that you could scale their maximum distance. We also added some quality of life property category expanding and collapsing for curves. And we got feedback on that early on, which drove us to bring to you some new features for this in beta 2. So in addition to that scaling percentage for distance on a per object basis, we also added a effective max distance column. So while that distance scaling is a percentage, we wanted to be able to do the math for you to give you an idea of what that max distance would be when you scaled the sound that is subscribed to an attenuation. So that just means that an attenuation can now have sounds that change their max distance depending on the sound. So in this example, we've got a magic sound that is at 100% of its distance scaling factor, and we can see the max distance of 2000 in the graph, whereas the footstep is scaled to 10%, so it's got a much shorter radius. Both sounds are using the same curves. We also added the ability to show these scaled values in the graph. So now you can show those scaled values using the eye icon next to the object in the objects using this attenuation. And you get the representation in the graph so that you can see what those values are. This also extends to being able to identify the distance for the node placement on the graph so that you can understand at what point you are at as your distance is being scaled. So just quality of life stuff that has come from feedback with folks out there like you using the beta. So excited to have that out in folks' hands. And we've also plan on bringing in for the next beta coming in the next week of September, this ability for metadata in the banks to be written for the effective max distance of the event. So what that means is We heard from some folks that they're using metadata in the sound banks to cull sounds based on their max distance. And so now we will, in beta 3 and then full release, in the metadata for the sound bank, iterate over all of the sounds for an event and return that maximum attenuation radius of all the sounds in the event, taking into account any of those scaling offsets. And really, this is just one piece towards the focused and iterative real-time workflow that we're bringing to 24.1 that includes live media transfer, being able to carry audio files from the original folders, update them in real time through Wwise connected to the game engine. And all of these things in the attenuation that we're talking about are real-time updatable. So change attenuations on your objects, resubscribe, change these scaling distance percentages, all in real time while you're connected. So jump in at the Audiokinetic launcher and install a special beta version of Wwise 2024.1, currently beta 2, and next week coming with beta 3. We've got another really exciting feature based on feedback coming to the beta 3 as part of an iteration on the property editor. So if you're interested in how this works and how we're listening to the community, get ready to jump into beta 3 to see what we've got in store. And please take the survey. In the launcher, there's using the question mark icon for a release, you can select take the survey and give us precise feedback about your experience with the beta or any version of Wwise. Report a bug, head over to the Wwise community Q&A or contact support if you have direct questions about your experience with the beta. Do not migrate your production to a preview or beta version of Wwise. Things could change in between the beta and the release, and so we want to make sure that you continue to be able to move forward with your project in style. Dig back into the hands-on with the 2024.1 beta 1 that we did. It was a big overview of many of the features in the beta. Meanwhile, our Strata product, a sound library in multi-track format. We continue to release new collections for that, and along with that, we have 2 free samples that you can get in through the launcher that give you full multi-track projects, individual sounds, rendered audio files, and design effects, all with their different configurations and components. Those 2 free samples are available right now, and coming soon, we've got a 3rd sample of our physics collection coming to you. So this is a collection of sounds in multi-track format that have been created specifically for game audio and the needs that games have for variation and dynamics and diversity. So keep them peeled and get signed up for news about that 3rd sample coming for free. And these are free as in free, like download them, use them as part of your projects, as part of your releases. The license is there for you to use these. So jump in and check out Strata. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the Wwise community. And the first thing I want to say is Airwiggles Implementournament. Okay, if you've been following along with the Airwiggles community, this is something that they've been talking about over the last week. There's a QR here you can jump off to read more about it. But essentially, they've produced an Unreal project that they're asking people to redesign using what's in place. They're giving you everything you need to be able to jump in and bend it to your whim. And that's the challenge, right? Implement your own game audio into this custom-made video game. You can also integrate Wwise, Fmod, or any other tools into it in order to create the best audio experience for what they've created. And that extends to the use of Atmoki Ears. Atmoki Ears is a premium plugin for Wwise and other middlewares that Atmoki is offering as part of the challenge. So jump over to the Implementournament forum and get a license from them to be able to explore spatial binauralization inside of the audio pipeline across the different tools, including Wwise. So a great bonus for folks out there who are looking to experiment with sound and really, create something interesting as part of the community. So information on how to enter and the deadline of October 9th. And just a great bunch of folks to follow along with. If you have experience, maybe you don't have the time to jump into this. Follow along in the Airwiggles community forum and lend a hand when folks are up against a problem. Again, community is there for everyone. So wishing everyone the best of luck with that and can't wait to hear what folks get up to. And if you're thinking about mixing, I just want to throw it back to a live stream that we did about mixing Baldur's Gate 3 with Wwise. This was a previous Wwise Up on Air where we featured a couple of folks from Larian talking about how they were using Wwise. They did some hands-on multi-band side chaining examples. They talked about the use of 3D audio to place the Dungeon Master overhead in a 3D audio scenario. And two of the developers sat down in Montreal at Interactive Audio Montreal and took another look at a tactile approach to a fantastical mix. So you'll be able to mine some additional insights. And so if mixing is your thing, or if you've been playing Baldur's Gate and are hundreds of hours in and want to hear more about what goes on behind the scenes in mixing, a couple of great opportunities for you to wise up. Meanwhile, Audiokinetic, we've been out in the community, and by we, I mean me. I headed over for the Gamescom DevCom in Europe last month and traveled around to communities in Amsterdam, Helsinki, Cologne, and Berlin. I was glad to meet with the community, talk about the beta, talk about Wwise, and really engage and get feedback about how people are authoring interactive audio out there. I also had a presentation with Stefan from Larian and Alistair Hurst from Dolby talking about 3D audio and really it being a technology for everyone to put their ears on and think about. So glad to meet with folks over in the Europe communities of interactive audio. Meanwhile, we'll be over in Shanghai on September 20th as part of our Wwise tour, rounding up over there, talking with a presentation from Harvey Scott, who did a recent Wwise Up on Air with us for Helldivers. He'll be taking a more focused look at that in Shanghai. We've also got a Wwise tour coming up in Helsinki, Finland on October 2nd. Some great speakers lined up for that, as well as Hilversum in the Netherlands on October 4th. So if you're in any of those towns or can position yourself there quickly, grab these QRs, get registered, and land for a few days of great conversations with Wwise developers and some additional news from us here at Audiokinetic. Again, we're so glad to be out there in the community, engaging with folks and helping to knowledge share from developers out there using Wwise. So as I mentioned, Wise Tour Helsinki, it's going to be awesome. Audio behind Frostpunk 2 and the Altars. We've also got some other exciting things planned for that. And then Hilversum, we're going to feature Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2. So folks over there from Ninja Theory talking about going behind the sound, as well as Will Roger talking adaptive music in Star Wars Outlaws. I wish I could be there for that. That sounds awesome. Meanwhile, at the end of October, we'll be landing at Games SoundCon. So any folks out there headed to Games SoundCon, looking forward to seeing you there, where we'll have a room across the 2 days, educating folks on Wise across introductions to game audio from square one to more advanced classes about optimization with Unity, 3D audio, acoustics, dynamic mixing, and some really cool runtime sound design using Strata. Meanwhile, again, dynamic mixing, have I said it 10 times? We've got a couple of great opportunities for you to land as part of our workshops on dynamic mixing with Mas Moretti. He does a fantastic job of taking you through all of the different ways you can expand on your dynamic mix using Wise. And it's not every project will use every mixing strategy, but knowing the tools that you have in the toolbox means that when you get to that moment and need to do some problem solving on the mix, you know what to reach for in order to make your game sound the best that it can. So dig in at our events page at audiokinetic.com. We've got other workshops coming up on CPU and memory, managing multi-language dialogue, and all of this, coming up, and just really great deep dives on what's happening. Speaking of deep dives, we have a 3-part technical blog series that came out recently, talking about customizing the listener position, animation lip sync using the Meter plugin, and using Wise to drive in-game cinematics using time stretch. Just a great overview of some really specific techniques that might apply in the games that you're working on. But regardless, we're so thankful to have our community helping to surface these things through our blog. And don't forget about our free Wise Indie license, something we've been talking a lot about over the last year. There's no reason for your smaller budget projects not to leverage the possibility of middleware like Wise with our free Indie license. And coming up next week, we're going to go hands-on with the integrations team here at Audiokinetic, talking about features for 2024.1. Auto-defined sound banks in Unity, Unity addressables, and Unreal packaging. So we're going to take a slice and go deep on these features that we're prepping for 24.1 that are part of the beta right now. We'll also talk about that beta 3 feature for the user interface and property editor that I mentioned. One word, favorites. So tune in next week and we'll go deeper into 24.1. But what are we here for? Let's talk about creative collaboration, sound, music, and technology. I'm so excited to be joined here today by Dan and Ellie. Thanks for arriving to Wise Up on Air.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Great to hear you and see you both today. Welcome. I'm so excited to dig in and hear more about the collaboration that the two of you had around this delightful game. But first, let's do some short introductions. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, how you arrived, and sketch in your character for us?
Should I jump in first?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So for folks watching, hi, my name is Ellie. I use they, them, and I'm a composer and sound artist for, I think, pretty much indie games. I don't think I've done anything more than that, like no double A or triple A sort of stuff, as far as I know in the near future. And I've been doing that kind of full time since around 2016. And my recent game credits outside of this as an audio lead include games like Salt Sea Chronicles and No Longer Home. Folks might also know me from games like Wilmot's Warehouse and A Monster's Expedition. But for Flock, in this case, I was just the composer, I've just been making music for this. Um, and the next game I'm on after this is the next Wilmot game, which we like recently announced a few weeks back. Wilmot works it out. And Surf Club, which is being shown at Tokyo Game Show next week. So yeah, that's me.
Nice. Hi, my name is Dan. I'm he, him. I've been a freelance sound designer, I think, since about 2010, which is baffling. I don't know where the time has gone. But I've done all sorts of stuff in that time: games, short films, animations, AR, VR, you name it, I've had a go. But more recently, since the pandemic, games have been more and more of a priority, I think, for me in my, I guess, career. So I've been working with people like Hollow Ponds and Us Two Games for quite a while now on things like I Am Dead, and with Us Two on things like Alba and Desta. Recently, I've been working a bit with Chucklefish on Witchbrook. So yeah, trying to get around the indie scene a little bit and work with lots of nice people.
Yeah, join
Um, yeah.
Nice. I heard a term recently, cozy games, and
mm.
this really
My
resonates.
face just changed immediately. Um, what about it?
I just the term resonates because I think Flock especially has a kind of cozy feeling to it, and I think I
Oh, yeah.
recognize that a lot of the games that I like invoke a kind of cozy feeling. So that that term really resonated with me, especially in the context of Flock. So,
Mm.
a fantastic game, some really cool features that I can't wait to dive into. Should we get a little overview of the game itself?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Ellie, do you mind sort of explaining the game? I can always play a bit as well
Yes.
in the background, Damien, if that works,
Yep,
and
sounds good.
just turn the volume down a
So,
little bit.
yeah, go for it. I should be coming through still all okay. Let us know if anything is too loud or too quiet, etc. My one sentence pitch for Flock has always been that you get to be a big guy, like a big bird specifically, getting to hang out with a bunch of little guys. And that's the general consensus of it. But there is a bit of like a little like story, kind of like goal driven sort of experience where at the beginning you've come into this world and there's a bunch of creatures who steal these whistles that your Aunt Jane has been collecting. So your goal over the course of the game is to collect these whistles that correspond with different sort of families and types of creatures that you'll come across in the game and have them as part of your flock. And you could also just not have to think about that for a bit and just enjoy exploring the space, just trying to figure out what kind of different sounds are peeking through numerous bits of the game. And yeah, like folks can like kind of enjoy it for what it is, I think, without having to worry about it being like a goal driven sort of thing. It feels like a kind of nice to have sort of thing for me personally. Um, but yeah, I hope that's a decent description of the game.
That's a perfect description of the game, I think. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
thank
great. And
you.
of course, we're seeing your flock trailing behind you during this. That's part of
Yeah,
your
mostly
flock, of
sheep at the
course, and
moment.
that kind of
Yeah.
changes over the course of the game. You identify different creatures, add them to your flock, uh, you know, as you said, there's different objectives that you can participate or choose. But as we're watching Dan fly through the environment, it's just a joy to experience, right? The sound, the visuals, and otherwise.
Sure.
That's the aim.
Yeah. It's funny, as we were getting stuff all together for this, like we've been looking back at like the older sort of footage of the game as well, and it does feel like wild to see how far along everything came through, like visually, compared to when development started like a few years ago.
But also
Like,
the other way around as well. I'm always amazed by how close it is to the prototype, really. Like, it looks a lot
oh
prettier now,
yeah,
obviously, but the DNA of it is really there from the get-go, which is
yeah, it
it's kind of
feels
cool to
very
see that's
solid.
progress. Yeah.
Like you see the mushroom forest on the left, but like this is basically like this is my favorite area of the game. And I feel like the core fundamentals haven't changed from that sort of space at all. Like all these the sort of core things we want to do on audio front is still very much there, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's been a nice thing about like the direction that we were kind of given audio and music wise, is that like we appreciated there was like a lot of trust being put in towards what we did. And I think a lot of like most of the demos I think I had, or at least on my end for the music, they haven't really changed that much from the sort of sketches that we had like back in say like 2021 or 22.
Right, and that trust, I think, comes from, you know, certainly your history that you have with the developers, so
Mm,
built up over time, and then of course the collaboration between you and Dan. This is something that, you know, emerged to free you both to express yourself through the sound of this game. We
Yeah.
got a comment from Micah Smith. Are they sheep or birds? Bird sheep? Either way, they're
Yeah.
adorable, they say.
they're pretty much, I think they do have sheep energy, do they? They're on the nose.
Yeah. We call them sheep.
But we got, yeah, in game they are very much sheep, and like they even have names.
And they
Um,
bar. They bar.
good
Oh, yeah.
sounds. Yeah,
So
they
who,
sound so baby.
how, maybe it's not the right time to dig into it, but will we talk about voice design? And because that didn't sound
That's
exactly like a sheep.
yeah.
I
This is exactly the
mean,
right time to talk about voice design.
yes.
Yeah, I was going to start by talking about the actually the main bird that you ride around on to begin with. Um, Zeroing in on what this sounded like took a surprisingly long time, a lot of back and forth and trial and error. Because the criteria was that it had to sound plausibly like a bird, but it also had to be able to sing songs and sing in tune. But also it had to do that without being whistly or human or too human. So nailing one of those things by themselves is okay, but nailing all three of them at the same time proved to be a bit tricky. We ended up really trying everything we could think of. On my side, I tried editing up all sorts of bird calls and different bird songs to try and find almost like a little, like a palette of sounds that I could reuse to make different songs from. But finding enough songs that were versatile enough that I could sort of have them all work but all sound like it's coming from the same bird just ended up not really working, to be honest. Like I could get one or two songs out of it, but then you couldn't make it do sort of emotes or anything a bit more personal, I guess. So we actually went and did like a little crowd, almost like a crowdsource on Twitter to try and find people who could imitate birds. With sort of mixed success, but it was really interesting to see what people came back with. I've got a few demos,
All right, great.
which hopefully you guys can hear. Like those sound great and they sound really bird-like, but you can't really make a song from that or have it emote or do all of these other things that we really needed. I'll play a couple more. Some were just whistles. So
Anyone watching who submitted anything to this, we're so sorry.
Yeah, we appreciate your efforts. These last ones, although they weren't quite right, sort of clarified a bit of a hunch that I'd had near the start, where I was like, if we really want this bird to be able to emote and sing in tune and have this sort of quite varied, not varied, but have a sort of sense of personality and life to it, then we really had to find someone to be the bird. And we found that in someone called luckily it was we found the right person. It was a friend of the art director Dick Hoggs, called Ellie Westbrook, and she's a performance artist, theatre maker, opera singer, and is just generally like super happy to go off piste, try things out, and be a bit silly with it, which really seemed to do the trick. We had an initial sort of test session where we recorded a bunch of ideas and just tried stuff out, to see what would work or what I could then later manipulate or pitch shift to kind of take it a little further away from sounding human. And with all of this, we were finding it's kind of the same with the beast as well, that less is more with the processing front. If we wanted it to sound kind of still a bit cute and wholesome and not too weird, and try and keep it sounding naturalistic, I guess is the right way to put it.
Yeah, I think there's only so much you can do until everything
Yeah.
starts to crunch up.
Yeah, you can't push things too far.
Also, there's an interesting thing just to interject with like the earlier sort of bird demos, because while they were really good, there's like a lot to think about in terms like of the shape of the bird and what kind of timbre should best represent it. So I always feel like bird is like very much like not like toucan, or maybe I'm thinking that because of the bird, but they've got like a big bod.
Yeah, they're quite hefty.
Yeah, so I'd feel like they would have some lungs on them, right? So I feel like
Exactly.
that would kind of make sense for the sort of sound that we would want to go for anyway.
Yeah, I mean we had a lot of demos that were sort of whistles or higher pitch stuff, and it just doesn't really fit this kind of bird, and a bird that's kind of squawking rather than like chirping or whistling.
Yeah, kind of parrot-ish.
Yeah. But I've got some raw recordings from Ellie, which I thought might be interesting to hear, and then we'll sort of go through a couple of later iterations of how that's then been edited up.
Nice.
Wow, what's that one?
So
I wish I know, Ellie.
yeah, we just tried all sorts of stuff out, and yeah, it turned out really good. And then I just kind of went through these huge hour-long recordings to pick out bits that really sounded extra birdy, and then pitched them up a bit, and we kind of ended up with these like nice little chirps. And yeah, I think in the context of the game, it works really well, and it really brings the bird to life.
Yeah, I was trying to remember because this is where my memory failed me, because part of the process is that this is probably more for, I was trying to figure out if this was more for the charming or general bird calling, but I had like kind of composed little bits of melody segments that Ellie could either like sing or the melody like she had sung the melodies and I tried to like transcribe them by ear. I was trying to remember which order I did that.
Well, because for the initial test, we were getting people to try to sing along to songs because we were kind of aiming for the tuneful part at that point. So I think you did some demos which they were singing along to or whistling along to, and it was something similar to that. So like this one that I've got here, this is one of the ones we sent to Ellie.
Oh, great.
So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of came up with the melodies, or?
So I think like I was trying to remember like the sort of things too that we considered, because one of the things I had in the back of my head was considering Ellie's range, and I think like she was quite set with that. So I think like I wanted to find a right fit of like trying to make sure things were like not too low or high in that sense, like make it a good like comfy level for her. There's also a thing like I did a lot of like the sort of like listening to bird song and just finding like it's fun to kind of like just pick out little patterns and rhythms of different kinds of birds, because sometimes like from what I've like transcribed or have like heard with some bird songs about how like a lot of them are limited to like 3 to 4 notes. Some of them
Mm.
are kind of like elongated or like shortened or like little kind of staccato bits, like basically like short like little stunts of sounds, and I feel like that can be fun to kind of experiment with.
Mm.
So I think like there was a lot of like experimentation with that, and I think I had a demo video I made a bit ago. I don't know if I think it was the first video at the top, but basically I think this is one of the things I did, but there were some songs that I think Birdsong's Ellie sung, and I kind of just transcribed them, and we used those as basically a way to like have them like integrated a bit more across the game with like creatures, especially when
Mm.
it came to like the kind of charming gameplay that we'll talk about later, where we would have the creatures trying to like echo the songs that different
Yeah,
like creatures are associated with. So if we play the track,
sure.
that'll be an example. Thank you. Yeah, so you can kind of see from like the example there how like there are really nice little examples of like the shortened little like accents to the
Mm.
bird song and like the longer um notes. So it's a lot of kind of like trying to hash out what to prioritize from that.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, and I think that kind of expanded to, I think I either sent those sort of ideas or things over to Dan, and I think he kind of went from there in terms of making up the rest of the songs for the creatures.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, it was a bit of an iterative process with Ellie because some of the songs are kind of hard to do. I guess hard to do by human voice, or hard to sing, or we're trying to get Ellie to put in these like sort of vocal, I don't know what you'd call them, sort of little vocal flutters and things like that, just to give it a bit less human energy, I suppose. But yeah, I've got some examples here of where we started and then where we ended up. So because we're trying to get Ellie to do all of these different techniques, I suppose, what we ended up with wasn't necessarily as clean as that. But then with a bit of editing and a bit of pitch shifting, so you can see that it has its DNA there.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really funny like seeing them in like such close like comparison like that, because I get like because like my like pitching ass was like trying to figure out like, oh, okay, this is where it's kind of coming from. So
Mm,
that actually like helps quite a bit to hear that.
yeah, I think we use them. We kind of quickly abandoned using them as very strict guidelines of exactly how the melodies should go, and we
Yeah.
started using them as like it's more of an idea just based on what sounds more natural as a bird almost, or what Ellie can kind of
Yeah.
get away with singing.
Also, it would be like, yeah, it would be unrealistic for a bird to be like super rigid with their kind of like
Yeah,
vocal range anyway.
yeah, but it's nice. You can kind of hear the sort of similarities in the melodies there, I guess, though. So yeah, it was really nice, sort of going from one to the other and having that inspiration to bounce off, really, with
Mm.
from both Ellies.
Yeah, you did that very well. The two of them.
Yeah. What should we do now? Should we talk about beasts a little bit and beast sounds?
Well, and
Yeah,
maybe if I
like
could
I
ask a
think,
question. So,
Oh yeah, sure.
in your edits for those, as you're lining them up and kind of conforming them in some way to the musical illustration. Are we just talking snips and edits? Are you doing some subtle pitching? Did you ever go deep into like a Melodyne or a auto-tune kind of world and start to mess with frequencies and stuff?
We didn't go into Melodyne or Auto-Tune. I think again, I was quite conscious that the more I was pitching stuff around, the harder it would be to get it to sound kind of natural. I have done just some pitching innuendo, so sometimes transposing notes a little bit or fine-tuning the pitch just slightly, just so that it's in musical key rather than making sure it's all like a nice harmonious tune. Because we're kind of skipping all over the place a little bit here, but basically the way that it works is that you find a creature that you haven't got in your flock that you want to put in your flock, and you put that in the creature in the flock by singing to the creature. So the bird calls to the creature, and the creature then sort of responds. But the bird, to learn the songs that the bird has to sing to the creature, you have to teach the bird the songs by whistling it. I hope this is making sense. So I did a bunch of whistles on an ocarina. So the player plays the whistles, the bird learns the song, and then the bird uses the song to catch the creatures. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll be sharing a demo of it. Later,
yeah.
Especially as we talk about music stuff later.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, the whistle as well. There's a fair amount of pitch shifting and stuff involved there too, because I'm not an ocarina player, and the ocarina only has 4 holes on the top of it, so it's got a limited range. So I had to sort of get a little bit pitchy with some of it.
Yeah.
Well, and this example really underlines that collaborative aspect, right? You've got some kind of melody being informed by you, Ellie. We've got the other Ellie, mirroring that as best as possible or approximating it. Then we've got Dan going in and putting some precision on that. And, on the flip side of that, you've got the ocarina that also plays in there and again comes full circle back around to the soundtrack and the music, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's a very iterative process, very circular, sort of everything's feeding off each other a little bit.
And of course, it was just like that from day one. You knew exactly what you were doing.
Oh, of course, yeah. No, it's I mean, game development, especially at the start of projects, tends to be very, very slow. So in the prototyping stage, I think over the course of about 6 months, we were figuring out how the bird should sound and what sort of songs it would be singing and things like that. It was a really long, slow process over many, many months. Obviously not working on it full time, but people are going away and thinking about it and coming back. But yeah, we had quite a lot of time, thankfully. Holopons are pretty good at getting us involved nice and early so that we can start doing, experimenting and thinking about things early on, rather than sort of rushing to production or trying to ship something out the door straight away. So it's nice to have that time to sort of think about it a bit.
Wow, there's so many things in what you just said that sound like a complete and total gift. Like arriving early, having space and time between iterations to think, like wow.
Consistency in a game studio. What a concept.
I'm not saying there was no mad dash at the end, though. There's always a mad dash at the end.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. Like sometimes, it can be like wanting to make sure we get as much things as we wanted to on the need there and then. But we were given quite a good bit of time and pre-production time to kind of have a think through the motions of things. And
yeah,
I think it's just generally a really nice practice to do, I think.
Yeah, they were very. I'd say the way that they make. I don't know if they'd agree with what I'm saying, and obviously I don't know what's the disclaimer. I don't speak for them or whatever. But I think they'd agree that it's a very organic process of making a game, making a Holopons game. The game kind of grows rather than has a very strict outline from the get-go. So yeah, I feel like the sound design and the music was able to do that too, really, and kind of grow and adapt with the game as it grew.
Nice. Well, and it's clear in the results, very holistic, of the game and from the game in the same breath. So nice work.
Exactly.
I have to mention The Wind Rises, the Miyazaki film, where
Oh,
there's a ton of mouth sounds and human vocalizations layered in as part of the sound and music. And I think this combination brings a kind of humanity to an experience that well, if you were just reaching for bird sounds or trying to piece it together synthetically, or pushing that content into too many DSP processes, you start to lose that the personality, right? And it just clearly has so much personality because of the decisions that you've made to preserve and keep that humanity intact. Got a question coming from the chat from Micah Smith. In sourcing the other animal sounds in the game, has it mostly been a mix of sound libraries, actor performances, or have you recorded any real birds or animals? Imagine that'd be a fun recording sesh. And maybe that's actually a tip-off to the next section.
It is, exactly. That sounds like a very good segue.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's perfect. So let's open the... I'm going to go to the creature guide in the game and just play a few, I think, just for starters. This is... maybe we should have mentioned.
This starts out empty.
Yes. So this is... I was going to say, we're spoiling some of the game by showing you all of this from the get-go. This starts out completely empty, and as you find creatures in the world... Yeah, sorry about the spoilers. But as you find creatures, this gets filled in, and you start compiling this huge sort of compendium of creatures that you found in the game. And one part of that is that you can play all of the sounds that they make as well.
Does anyone have a favourite creature? Mine is the moonglebe.
Moonglebe.
That's just good owl energy.
Yeah, some of them...
Very clearly what it is, but it is very good.
I think it might actually be an owl. So some of these are real creatures. Most of them have been...
Awesome for you. I remember sending you a bunch, but I don't know.
I think one or two of those might have made it into the game.
Out of God. No, it's great.
Well, we had such a long iterative process with the beast sounds of the game as well, and just sort of trying different things, seeing what would work, because there's families of beasts as well as the beasts themselves, if that makes sense. So there's there's a bunch in the Piper family, or there's a bunch in the Glebe family, and they all have to sort of have something tying them together. Some are more close than others, like all of the thrips are quite sort of small, almost, or a bit more mosquito-y kind of energy, so they have a sort of very light and small sound to them, whereas some of the others are, I don't know, chunkier and a bit more like big fish. Oh, these ones are more like dolphins. So yeah. But I mean, they're all very strange, very weird creatures, and as a result, I think the sounds hopefully reflect that a bit as well. Most of them, well, I'd say it's maybe, if I had to put numbers on it, I'd say something like 40% was, or 30 or 40% is probably me in various forms, recording stuff and then messing around with it, or recording source material and playing around with it. Maybe 50-60% of it is decent, really, really good, high quality, high sample rate library recordings that I could then manipulate and turn into something new. A small number of them haven't changed too much from where they were to where they've gone. I think there's one that's almost exactly like a goose or something. Maybe it's just pitched down a bit. But we really wanted this guy to be super annoying. There's a bit in the marshes where you fly into a clump of them and they'll all just kind of honk away and run away from you. But yeah, I've got a couple of quick examples in Nuendo as well of, I think, what we ended up with and then how we got there. So these are the little kind of mosquito-y bug-type flying little guys.
Right.
And most of these ones were all me recording myself doing pretty dumb stuff very slowly and then pitching it up. So I guess you can see from this example how much it's been pitched up. But this next bit's a bit embarrassing for me, but we're going to do it anyway because, you know, let's go for it.
Okay, you can do it.
So yeah, this is the end result, and this is the raw recording. Yeah.
I don't think that you can like get the rhythm of it like really distinct when you like even when pitched up. Like I think that's
Yeah. Well, that's what I found. I found that like the rhythm was just as important, and having something that started some way and then sort of tailed off at the end or did something different at the end really helped to kind of give it a more interesting sound than just one like bah or whatever.
Yeah, I would actually be convinced that like hearing, you know, the final result, it would feel like that's a legit feature. So...
What else do we do? This is another one of the thrips, I think.
I can kind of be like it feels with the little...
Yeah. Well, this one's got kind of a sort of longish nose, so it looks a bit more mosquito-y.
Yeah.
I did a bit of sort of side chain expanding on this guy to, so anytime we hear, we get a bit of the buzz underneath it. But again, this one started out incredibly silly as well, I'm afraid. You get the idea.
Great.
I found one as well. I've forgotten about this one. This is something like me rapidly moving a cup on my arm up and down to sort of get a very weird. But the raw recording is so it's sort of like, I don't know if you can see my like sort of putting my hand over a glass a bunch of times.
Oh yeah.
Which guy is that anyway? That's one of these guys, I think. Emerald Burbot. Yeah.
Sound
I love how they
design
look like they can make the
exposed.
sound as well.
That's great.
Oh yeah, what was I going to say? So I was going to say that a couple of sound designers that I was kind of thinking about when working on these sounds is people like Mark Mangini and Paula Fairfield. So Mark Mangini used the sound of like a baby squirrel for the desert mouse in Dune. And something about that worked super well, like the idea of just having this super simplistic little sound for this super simplistic little creature. And that's kind of what we had to do for a lot of this. So, I mean, you'll probably see in the project, this is one of the few that's got some layering, and that's because it's in water, so we had some sort of bubbly water layers to it as well. But most of the creatures are just one layer almost, or just one thing that's been pitched a bit or had some sort of effect on it as well. So again, we're really trying to not over-process or not overcomplicate things and try and keep things kind of clean and simple. But when someone mentions like beasts in a game, my first thought personally would be something quite, you know, like an orc or a goblin or a dragon or something that's going to be roaring that you can really layer up and have loads of intricate layers doing different things. But for this, I kind of found that you kind of had to keep it simple. There's one creature that does go a bit, gets a bit more complicated, which is this guy. And because it's such a big, I think this has got layers of me in it as well, roaring. But there's some nice sort of gurgly rumbles in there too. But besides this one, most of the others are fairly like, I don't know what the word would be.
Some of the droop sounds I think are fairly low in range, like the yellow legs maybe.
Yeah, it's low in range, but it's probably one layer is what I'm saying, I guess.
Right, yeah.
And not layered up like you might do with I don't know, like Gary Rydstrom doing the dinosaur in Jurassic Park. We kind of couldn't get away with doing that, or it would sound too complicated or too big for such small creatures.
Yeah.
And where did you land with designing variations? Because there's a fine line between, you know, iconifying a creature and making sure that if you're hearing it frequently that you're getting a diversity of variations.
Yeah. I think we weren't going super crazy with variants. Let's have a quick look in Wise, I guess. There's probably, I think we're aiming for sort of 5 to 6 per creature. Oh, maybe more than that. Sort of 6 to 10 maybe.
And subtle, maybe hit me with a variation set for one of the creatures, just so we can see, how dramatic you're pushing those.
These all have a bit of random pitch on them as well, so that helps a little bit. So this is a creature when it's hiding underground, so that's why it sounds a bit sort of reverby and echoey. It's kind of hiding in a hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, great. I mean, they sound similar enough to be obviously the same creature, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, the setup in Wise is pretty simple, really. We had one event that plays the beast barks. So if any beast is doing a bark, it plays this one event, which plays this one switch container with a bunch of other containers in it and a bunch of other switch containers, which then dictate what creature is barking and what the context of their bark is. So if they're being charmed, they have a slightly higher, I think we've just pitched it up a bit or something, or I'll be honest, it's been 6 months or 12 months since I last touched it, so it's been a while. But yeah, I think if they escape, that's pitched up as well. Otherwise, they're close to the player or they're in the guide. And each of these needs a different attenuation setting. If you're in the guide, you don't really want it to be panned anywhere. You want it to be nice and central, and everything else you want it to be where it sounds like it should be, for want of a better way of putting it. I think we might have changed it depending on whether you're charming the beast or whether it's just sort of generic and flying around in the world. I have a feeling that if it's escaping, maybe it's got a slightly higher range or slightly simpler curve, because we want to be able to hear it for longer, whereas ones in the world are using a more sort of naturalisticy, like loggish for a more realistic drop off, I guess. Whereas if it's running away from you, you sort of want to hear its call as it flies off. Yeah, hopefully that all makes sense so far.
It all makes sense, and I know we're going to get into some of the charming, and maybe charming is the right word and the right word, but the charming of the creatures where you're actually collecting them as part of your flock. Which is something you mentioned there as part of the considerations that you had around the different styles of barks.
Yeah, should we move to the musical side then, Ellie? Do you want to move to the music part of charming, or?
It's up to you. I mean, I didn't know if we were going for a full sound sort of thing, but if it's easy to jump to charms, then we can totally do that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I mean, there's not too much. I had a couple more notes on things I was going to mention on the Wise sound design side, and then I think maybe I'll just run through those real quickly.
Yeah, sure.
One thing I always do when making a new project is test beeps. I make a load of beeps, different pitches. It makes it easy for me to know what's going on and if something is working, and easy for the developer as well.
You're using those across systems to ensure that when you're standing up, like animations or physics
exactly.
or other things?
Yes, all of those things.
Okay, cool.
If we're not sure if something is working or not and we can make it beep, then we know that it's working and the problem is my side, not the developer's side. Or vice versa. If there's no beep, I know it's on them. So they always prove useful if I'm trying to make sure that I'm not the one in the wrong or that they need to fix something. So yeah,
excellent. And
test beeps are always my first thing I make.
You're using Wise Sign or
no, maybe I should. I think I just import some random beeps or some test tones and then chop them up and pitch them a bit.
Well, those
just so we've got some varieties.
Pleasant sounding, so I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think if they're unpleasant, then it gives people more of an incentive to fix it quicker.
Motivational.
Yeah. That's how I treat it anyway. On the ambient side, I was going to just quickly mention that we sort of used a bit of a combo. So There's obviously day-night cycles in the game. The ambience is changed depending on the time of day and all that kind of thing. That's all done using blend containers and a big RTPC for the time of day. There's also some generic ambient sounds for sort of day and night as well. So there's these like pockets of ambience around the world for the big general areas, and then if you're not in one of those big areas, you kind of get the generic bed, let's say. Let's have a quick look. So yeah, standard kind of time of day situation. Each one has its own. Each area of the game has its own sort of set of crickets and frogs or insects that kind of differentiate it from the other areas. And at the bed of all of these is a quad track for each one as well. So you get a bit of movement if you're panning the camera around and things like that. I just wanted to get that sense of movement. If you're moving around or flying around quickly, you can kind of hear the background moving around a little bit. Not too much that it's jarring, hopefully. But yeah, that's kind of what the little creatures and the insects are there for too, just to kind of give you that kind of contextual movement as you're flying around and moving through things.
And on top of those beds, you've got positional emitters throughout the world.
Yeah.
I know when I was playing, some of my most delightful moments were cruising the world and actually pausing in different locations and just letting the ambient happen with the small random positional elements in the ambient.
Exactly. Yeah, so yeah, it's a kind of a combination of all of the various usual techniques, I guess. Bit of quad, bit of positional, bit of random around the player, and yeah.
And those positional,
RTPC.
did you just like put those, attach them to different models, or how did you implement those in the world, so to speak?
Let me think. So one of the bigger ones, or one of the trickier ones, was trees, because there's so many trees in the big forests. We got one of the tech guys to set up a system that basically turns emitters on and off depending on how close you are to the trees. It might be a bit too subtle on the stream, especially if I'm talking over it, but each tree has an emitter on it and has a sort of very faint little rustle as you fly past them. So I really wanted to get that sense of whooshing when you're flying past these trees, but also have them correctly positioned so that it does sound like they're going either side of you. Which I think works quite nicely. Again, it's very subtle though.
Nice detail.
And then, yeah, I think the last thing I was going to mention on the sort of sound design wise side was I found a nice little use for random containers with trigger rates for making the final cutscene of the game. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but yeah, the final cutscene has got loads and loads and loads of flocks of creatures all flying around all over the place in little groups. And I think I had to get that cutscene done really quickly because we were nearing a deadline. And I was thinking of how to approach it. All of the cutscenes, by the way, were done like linearly. So when we hit a cutscene in the game, we just press play on one track of audio, which lasts the entire length of the cutscene, both for the sound design and the music. And so, yeah, I had to get this done really quickly. And I thought, okay, well, I can just drag in all of these little wavs of the creatures making their noises and layer them all up over multiple tracks. Or I can just make these random creature firers, which will just make a cacophony of whatever sort of set of creatures I want to be hearing. So I looked at each of these little flocks that were flying past and said, okay, this has got all of the different types of cosmate in it. So if we hit play, it'll probably not sound good, but it'll sound like a lot of cosmates. Yeah. And again, okay, it sounds a bit mad out of context, but with a little bit of mixing magic and bedding it in with everything else, it worked really well to just have this nice source material of a clump of creatures rather than having to layer them all up one by one.
So it's kind of a stinger that you can drop into the cutscene that just sounds like the group of creatures that's being presented.
Well, yeah. I mean, I sound designed all of the cutscenes in Nuendo like linearly as you would any other sort of short film or anything like that. So I just had big chunks of creatures rather than loads and loads of little fiddly bits of audio I had to mess around with.
Cool.
It was just a much quicker way of getting it done.
Yeah, to be clear, you were like exporting, you're finding a
Yeah,
way to get the audio from Wise, like recorded, and
yeah,
then getting it into your DAW to edit. And I think that's a really good idea.
yeah. I was recording straight out of Wise basically into the DAW and then using that.
Yeah. Fun fact, I think like stopping like talking about Flock for 1 second, I did a very similar thing. It's only just because it's like slightly related. I did a very similar thing for one of the tracks for a Monsters Expedition soundtrack where I was recording a lot of the dynamic sort of music, sort of little interjects that will happen during the game, and I kind of just like live played the kind of Fmod file and the game to like kind of capture those and mix those in. So I think it's just a really nice way to get that sort of thing down naturally. This was translated well for Flock and its cutscene as well.
Yeah,
Totally.
cool. Should we segue into music a little bit?
Yeah, it's my turn. I mean, would folks want to hear more about like about Charming first, or should I just like go off about anything in particular?
Let us know in the chat if you have questions or other observations, things you want to hear more about, and we'll weave it in. But I think, Ellie,
Yeah,
just
definitely don't
take
be
it
afraid to
away.
like interject.
Yeah.
Hey, cool. So just to like jump into stuff, I think like Dan's got the reins of the media that I have to share just because we thought it'd be much easier for this setup. So not much in terms of gameplay, but video. But just to like start off, like I have like actually talked about some of the musical elements of the game already in an interview with gamedeveloper.com, which was a really cool experience. And I recommend like checking that out as like a summary of the direction of the music and talking a bit more about the initial inspirations and explorations that I had for the game. And also interestingly, like from what was different on this project compared to like other ones for me is that I didn't like we had a very close like collaboration between each other, and that was like really helpful, especially since I did not have as close an involvement in implementation this time around, as in like um in most other stuff I'll be on, I'll be directly implementing stuff myself as well. But I think we figured out kind of a workflow where I would document things for Dan as like a reference for both of us to go off. A lot of kind of like synced video mockups as well, just to like get things as close to what is possible, or just figure out kind of like compromises from that as well.
Hmm.
And I would also just like hash, this is more for like my reference, but I would sometimes hash things out in my default middleware. Like just to like have it in my head that I'm like, okay, I want to do this and that. And that's kind of how I want to communicate with Dan about how best to go about like setting things up for the game. So transparency wise isn't my default middleware. This is the part where I'll get shot down immediately. But yeah, it's been a really good learning curve nonetheless.
And I think
So
being
that's
able
kind
to,
of like, yeah.
if I can interject, being able to translate your compositional vision, right, using tools that both in the DAW and in other middleware, uh, ultimately, you have this clarity for how you want to communicate or how you want the composition to communicate, right? And so
Yeah,
it
definitely.
it then becomes about the conversation and the collaboration with Dan to figure out, okay, well, what does that mean in the framework of the tools that are being used for the game? And I think it's great because what I hear is just you have this vision, you're able to then communicate and collaborate towards
Mm.
something that really fits what you're trying to express with the music. So that
Yeah,
That's great.
absolutely. I think between the things that I'll be showing, we can always cut to like the little bits of like what how Dan interpreted the things I wanted to do in Wise as well. So we'll be like cutting in bits and bats and stuff of that. So to start with, one of the things that you would have just heard it, I think, in the gameplay just then, but as you're exploring the world, you'll occasionally hear these nice kind of sparse bits of music in numerous intervals. I don't know if they actually had a name, but in game, like we called them incidentals, or at least I called them that. And I wanted to kind of like, I try not to like use like game influences or inspirations too much in game music generally, but I felt like for the setup that we had here, I felt like it makes sense to emit a kind of similar energy to how games and like Minecraft and Breath of the Wild would be quite spacious and breathy and be very like infrequently performed. As we'll say, I think like I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of space made to allow folks to take a breather in between like hearing the distant calls of the creatures, like the ambience of the trees. Like I know Damien, you were just saying about like having to stop the game for just a little bit, like and just hanging out in the space. Like it feels like folks appreciated like having like I think there's power in how you can use like silence or quiet interludes when arranging music in a space like this. Like you don't necessarily have to have or like go out or go home with like music sort of thing. Like definitely allow like
Like I've got
time
to
to
get
breathe.
this. I got to get this theme in your head. I've got to really get it there.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, it's funny like how like this like the piece that you would have heard in there like would sound a bit more like a little tune now, but before then it did used to sound like a lot more ambient and drone heavy, and it was kind of more consistent with some of the earlier things I was listening to as inspirations. So there would be there might folks might know like Brian Eno, of course, and there's also Ulla Strauss. So there's like a handful of like folks that I would have in the back of my head at least when it comes to like the main kind of like compositions and stuff like that. Dan, if you would be up for sharing the first video, this is how it actually sounded. And look how blocky everything looked in a good way, because like you can kind of see the how the shapes and everything has been like really consistent. It still had kind of the character of everything. So I think this video was back in like 2020 or 21.
Yeah, that's wild.
Fantastic.
But you can still see. I mean, it still looks so much like the forest.
Yeah. There's some like
And like the
early
bird.
ambience. Yeah, early ambience
Yeah.
from Dan as well. Like there's a really cool bit coming up that I'm looking forward to that there's like really just still shows how space and ambience is important, I think. There we go.
We sort of wanted Under the Mushrooms to sound heavy and almost a little oppressive because you have this huge thing, this huge weight over your head.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
having the music like being super thin to like
kind
have
of
that
dips out a bit.
like come through. I think like we definitely kept the spirit of that in some ways later in the game. Um so yeah, I really like that.
And,
This became a bit more tuneful, yeah, in this next video. Feel free to
but
just
what
play
we
it
Shall I
were
out.
roll
just
it?
seeing was
But
in-game footage, so that was already you'd stood up some music, some ambience, even some systems to dynamically mix those elements. Or was
I
it?
actually don't remember if that video is just
um
like if we recorded a video and put our audio on and mixed it in the
yeah,
video.
I'm trying to figure out, did I just like because I would usually get the videos and just like did I just make some mock ambiences myself?
Um,
Sure. It
I
might have
honestly don't
been, yeah.
remember at this point. It's
Yeah,
about
it would
four
have been
years
so
ago.
long ago. I mean, like, if it was like super early on and it would have been
Mm.
like a demo, it might have been like me trying to be like
Yeah.
figure out because I would do a lot of like kind of like combining ambient sort of sounds with the music anyway. And one of the early experiments I did with like those sorts of things is like stretching out the reverbs in a way to make them a bit like more synthetic and more tonal, and that would be kind of like a stylistic approach I like to take when it comes to like ambienty kind of drones.
Yeah. I mean, if it was just a linear representation meant as a kind of aesthetic direction, like I think that's super cool. Like to be in early enough alongside the game to give a kind of representation of the direction that music and sound is aiming for. Like I love hearing about these tools that people use to communicate audio intention, right? I think that's a really
Yeah.
valuable phase.
I do that for almost every project I start working on. As soon as I start working, the first thing I'll do is record a few minutes of gameplay and sort of re sound design it or sound design it for the first time, I guess in this case.
Mm,
Um,
yeah,
just
same.
to get my sort of thoughts down on paper to show the team and to get their feedback, their initial first gut reactions to what I've done, to see if they think this is exactly what we should be doing or if we want to tweak things. Yeah, it's a really
Kind
good,
of like
useful
a
tool to just kind of guess, sort of test the waters a bit really quickly.
It's kind of like a meta vertical slice of
Mm.
sorts, trying to like get a
Exactly.
demo of what you want to do.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. This video is a next step from what happened. So I think since then I've like kind of made it a bit more tuneful. I think we wanted to get in more like kind of acoustic like instruments as well, and like while still kind of keeping in faithful of the sort of sounds that we wanted to do. I feel like to kind of contrast with like how like I think when you look at a game like this, you would imagine most things to be kind of like very electronic-y and kind of synthy. And whilst that is the case with like a handful of it, I feel like for when it comes to the exploration, I feel like it should be as grounded as it could um possibly be. Like I wanted to keep it minimal, but also have like try to have different sets of like textures that I felt like resonated with each space. So like the ones like I think the one that we're about to show here will sound a bit more different sonically because I think I've since changed it from one area of the game to another sort of thing. So
Shall I roll it?
yeah, go for it. Thank you. Yeah, so it's pretty much just like I love like the little interrupting. I don't know what creature was that.
That's a creature sound that's been uh, replaced, I think. So that's a very old 2022. It says so that'll be a creature that's been made extinct.
Rip to a real one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Cool.
but yeah, like what was nice about that pretty much was the main kind of foundation. I think that track, like I think like this will be a different layout. This is Logic now, Logic Pro. What was I going off? So I think like as I said, I wanted to have it quite acoustic sounding in most places, but still having little beds of textures to kind of give each area of the game, which I think was like 5 to 6 total, like a bit more of a kind of sonic identity in a way.
Hmm.
Here I've got like a just a layout of how I'd like arrange some of the things, and it's quite minimal in this case. I had like mostly a kind of mix of some acoustic instrument libraries, but there'll be some like sounds as well. I think like the main synths I used for it was Reactor for some of it. I think one of the ones I recognize is from Reactor. But like Dan was saying about the ambience, I also changed the music for some of the game to reflect a day and night cycle. And we thought like while the day would be like quite bright, and I would want to kind of represent that with being a bit more acoustic, and the timbre like of that is a bit more like higher and brighter. I'd imagine like the evening would be a lot more like subdued and a bit like
Simmered
mysterious, I
down.
suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit more chill.
Exactly. So you can see like how like later on, like it'll just like I think one half will show like what it'll sound like in a day, and then an evening segment. So if you can go ahead and play
Sure.
that. Compared to the last demo, I've got a bit more strings in there as well. Have it make it feel more, I don't know, adventurous in a way. And a bit fuller as well.
Does this follow on into the night section as well?
Yes, it does. Okay. You kind of tell like what I have muted, like just alternate between that when I'm like recording. So we've got some like reverberated kind of like strings and synths. Yeah, I think I like the result of that. I think the main point of the music I want to make for the incidentals is to like keep it, you know, minimal in a way to like allow things to be brought out sound design wise, but also make it flexible with the next bits of music that I'll be making for, which is basically the more kind of dynamic stuff we had in the game. But maybe, I don't know, Dan, if you wanted to show anything for set up incidentals, but it might be quite straightforward.
Yeah, there's not a lot to show, to be honest. It's using the same RTPC, same time of day RTPC for everything. So
Yeah, I think that would like what you got there actually would probably be just that demo, really. It's the same setup.
yeah.
Pretty simple. Transitions really nice there.
Yeah, they do crossfade as well. So if you do happen to be listening to a piece during the crossover between night and day,
Yeah, there's
you'd
like
have
no
a little
clashing.
fade.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
These were done. I didn't bother setting these up in the music section of Wwise because these are one shots essentially. So I just thought, let's just have them in the same place. It doesn't matter if they're ending at different times. I don't need to worry about that. I just need to fade it out at the end and adjust the level slightly and let it roll.
Yeah,
And that's a
I think
totally valid technique, right? It's like, you know,
it feels lazy to me, but
no way. Like there's some elements of a soundtrack that don't require beat synchronicity or, you know, the transitions, and it's absolutely valid to, you know, put those into the audio hierarchy because they just are kind of fire and forget. And when you talk about indeterminacy or intermittence, right, you must have some kind of scheduling for that where it's happening, you know, with some amount of delay in between those things.
Exactly. So that was handled on the code side of things. I think Ricky set it up, but there's a little system of rules, I guess, which dictate when the music plays, and we had, I think, to prevent them firing off all of the time. Like every time you go into a new section, at one point, every time you go into a new section, the new music would play. But we set up some rules to say, okay, well, if we've heard a piece of music within the last 90 seconds, then we don't play anything for another 90 seconds. If you go to a new area, you should hear some new music, but only after you've been in there for 12 seconds consistently. So we had to set up all these rules so that if people were crossing boundaries frequently between the different zones, we weren't just getting a bit of music playing and then stopping and then another bit of music playing. So yeah, there was a lot of thought put into making things feel relaxed, for want of a better way of putting it.
This kind of game side music conductor, really, it knows the game intimately, and then from that, as you said, you create these rules to make sure that the music is game contextually appropriate, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and to like make it a bit spacious for other things as well. Like one of the thing, what I was going to go into next is basically a bit more of like the interactive side of what we tried musically. So there's these like I really wanted to like use whatever space like between like the incidental music as like an opportunity to try those. And we had little bits of areas like tunnels and hoops that we used to like kind of just add little like stingers and tunes that can be played each time. So we'll just like kind of like customize them, or I would customize them to be timed so that like it will be fitting for whatever the object is. So if it was like a tunnel which you're kind of like underground for a brief second, that would be like a handful of like a few seconds. And then like we've got the little hoops. Like I know I made videos, Dan, but would it be easier to show in game? If you could just
Uh,
like across them.
let's have a look. Uh,
Yeah, sorry to just put you on the spot, but I was
that's all
like
right.
thinking like it would probably be like just easier to demo them that way. So here's one. Yeah, what's
So each
really
one you
cool
go through has a little
about
musical sting.
yeah, like what's really cool about those is like how they're arranged in a row that you can just like go on for like however long that you want to. Because you can see that there's like a bit of a pathway
Yeah,
that you can follow for however long you'd like, really. Oh my God, that goes on for ages. I just registered that.
it does go on a
Um,
bit.
yeah, if we head to like the Lupin's area, they'll probably be the tunnels as well. So the
You can't
palette for
normally zip this fast. It's
yeah, like
developer hacks.
we're going Sonic on this, everyone. There we go. So I've kept everything like super minimal, like very like slight ambience. I thought like because the guitar harmonics was like a very like kind of predominant part of like the incidental palette, and that would
Mm.
be the only thing that would probably be playing if there was anything else musically. It made sense that like it would act as kind of like an addition to the music, if anything. And I think like we did a bit of like iteration of like trying to find ways to like have the music fade back in and out kind of naturally that way.
Yeah. Yeah, we did a bunch of sort of side chaining and ducking and grouping things together to try and make sure that you could hear what you needed to hear when you needed to hear it.
Yeah.
Obviously, as the production went on, that became more and more complicated to kind of go up to update and keep sensible. But I think we just about managed it.
Yeah.
Shall I shall I fly up a thermal?
Yeah, I was gonna say like maybe we can do this in reverse, but we can show like what this was like and then we can show the before.
Thermals were another one of the sort of musical things.
Yeah, here you go.
On the Y side, there's an RTPC tracking height over the ground so that we can sort of move the music up in line with how high the player is. And then if we swoop down, it'll do a nice little...
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite parts about it. There'll be like little variations of that little like descent
Yeah,
theme that you'll hear as well, just because like, you know, you might be doing that a bunch. Um, you know, if you're
definitely.
into that.
Yeah.
So like yeah, like this was a fun like the demo of that hasn't changed like too much because if we go to like an old video then I think it's like the 2022 one. Yeah. Um it's a lot more kind of synthy. You can go ahead and play it. And I think I was just composing over video for this sort of case, like exploring things.
There we go.
Taking ages to get down. I'm sorry, everyone. But like the core part of it just hasn't changed too much, especially during like the last half of it. But I think it was like that first half that we were kind of like hashing out a little bit more
Mm.
because like I had like composed a bit more freely in terms of the timing, but this is where like this is like a figuring out of like a challenge and a compromise of like how can we split that up in a way that feels like natural to however you're going on, and you have to consider like maybe you drop off the thermal early on
Yeah.
things. So I think ultimately, we kind of broke that first half up into two, where I've got things in kind of like half time, like slowly going in terms of the like arpeggiated pattern, and then having a fast day instead of just having that like gradual kind of timing thing. Because I think that would be a bit trickier to do otherwise. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember because we started off with quite long loops, but then for the end result, I think we've gone for pretty short 4 bar, I think, or 2 bar actually. It looks like 2 bar
I
little
think it was
loops that we fade between. So they're all just 2 bars long, and then we just fade between them all as we go up the thermal
yeah,
or something.
Because it's
bit
always
easier.
ascending thing. You're not, are you hanging out at a certain level of the thermal for any duration?
Well, you don't know what the player's going to do.
Yeah.
You can ascend the thermal, I think, at slightly different paces as well. So we wanted something that would be adaptive to the player. So if you do get up to the top quickly, or if you take your time to get up there, it will still sort of sound height appropriate, for want of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I
Nice.
thought that last layer would be nice and high pro. I've just got like a very simple little like kind of stringed layer, but that would be kind
Yeah.
of like, I remember I think watching like little animations where you have that kind of like climatic kind of trope where somebody would have that kind of before going down, and I feel like that would be kind of a nice way to emulate that a bit.
Well, then you kind of strung
Yeah.
it all together there, right? You had this memory or idea of something that you'd experienced across other media, this trope of a kind of moment of kind of payoff as this happens. And then we saw
Mm.
your kind of blue sky video linear imagination of how that would be, and of course the in game and how that came together with the bits and pieces in the music system to be able to allow for that kind of um, progressive musical experience, right?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's not just from a story front that I'm like, yeah, taking that kind of like inspiration. I like animation tends to be just like a go-to sort of thing for me in terms of like inspiration. I think like Dan was saying about like his work about like animation, I have also have done bits for animation, and I feel like an alternative timeline slash like a bucket list thing would be to compose for like an animated like TV show on like the scale of like shows like Infinity Train sort of like shows, but hopefully when the industry on that end improves so much better, pending animation guild conversations and all that fun stuff. Anyway, but yeah, like I remember like for specifically for this game, I think there was like one bit of the game for with the fog segment. I think like I don't think we had anything lined up for that, but I think I remember a specific like animation reference. I think it was like a scene in Steven Universe or something where there was like this really nice kind of like running segment from like one of the characters, and had this really nice sort of like piano like pounding bass. Like shout out to Ivy and Surasu, the composers for that, by the way. Really good folk and composers. And there was like that particular song, I was like, I kind of want to get that feeling of like, the journey, the traveling in that. So could we get into a fog, Dan?
Yeah, I was just going to say I can totally get into some fog. Where's the fog?
Find the fog side quest. Yeah, we got a bit of the music that it comes through when you're surfing. Here you go. I really like that kind of intro fade in as well. I don't know how much people like explored much in the fog coming close to you did. Thank you, Damien. So I feel like it's mostly like a nice little surprise for anyone who like goes in and it's like, hello.
Absolutely, it was delightful to be floating around out there. I could live in
Yeah.
fog on occasion. In fact, in Seattle, sometimes I do.
That sounds tough.
I don't know. I mean, same here actually. Well, like in my area of the UK, because I'm in the north, we'll occasionally get the kind of like low fog mist in the morning. So like the town, depending on where you are, will just be like either right above like the fog. So like anyone up in the valley, just you're just gone. It's disappeared, or like if you're just above it, yeah, it's a very good weird experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like an inspiration. Adventure Time, I tend to fall back on a lot in terms of animation inspiration as well. I think Tim Kaiko was like one of the composers for it, and he actually, I think, like coincidentally, had used like a handful of like the similar sort of synths that I've used, like Yuhi, I think, the makers of that. Like I think they've used sort of similar stuff, and it's helped with like composing a handful of like the later bits as well, in terms of like not just like approaching like the abstractness in the sort of things that we're doing, but also like the humor as well. So it's just like really refreshing to kind of see that kind of like thing shown in animation as opposed to like Looney Tune sort of energy. Not that there's anything wrong, it's just it's that bit on its own is so distinctive. But like this sort of stuff is especially like really refreshing for me. Anyway, that was my TED talk about animated music. Um, um, one of the other bits that we were going to go into is, I think, the most kind of like, I'd say it's the most intricate of like the interactive stuff. I don't know if they actually had a name in game, but we called them orbitals just because of how like you would work like around them. And I think in like one of the grasslands in the area called Painted Bowls, I think there's some nearby, but basically you and your bird will kind of go around these little like orbitals, and they'll have like a kind of drone play back, and then as you connect to that, you'll have like a little kind of arpeggiated or rhythmic kind of like um sort of atmospheric sort of time with them.
Shall I jump into the demo?
Yeah, please. This is I think like the earliest version of it, so this will just be nice and drony.
Ooh, nice and compressed.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah, this is like a very early version of it. I think this was like kind of shouting back to the very early incidental demo stuff I did as well. So I'm glad that we kind of caught a bit of that still. Kind of very like using woodwind instruments.
Very ambient, this one.
Like some woodwind, some brass, I think like I think I'm just in trumpet.
Is the next one the final
next one
version?
is basically, or not the final, but it's like the kind of step up from there. So I think here we've I've added a more arpeggiation, a bit more detail, and I think we had like worked to try and like bounce between different orders and like figuring out how they change, whether you would either hit the next one or whether you like set off on them as well. But I think the final result from like the video that we have here, I think there's like different textures and whether rhythms and patterns that can just be like generated at any point that Dan can show in Wise shortly. And I feel like they were a nice way to kind of like build up on that, and like there's like a slight kind of like playful experience that folks can have. It's like bits of like I wanted to kind of not deliberately like emit kind of like Hohokam energy, but it would be nice to kind of have like this sort of like spaces where you can just like play with the environment as much as you can. Yeah.
So I think this is near enough the final result.
Yeah, pretty much. I think this wouldn't be like too long. I think it is almost like you're generating a kind of piece of music as you're going between these, which is like what I really like about it.
Yeah. In the
That's
Wise side,
super
I think we
clever and
used.
fun.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's a nice little thing. With a little bit of it was kind of a slightly more complicated setup, I guess. We had a sort of starts of each section and then loops of each section that they'd go into after the start. And then we had, I think, stingers somewhere in here. We've got some stingers, which were like little transition symbols, basically. We found that we needed something to ease the transition between the sections, because otherwise there's a little bit of a something on some of them when you go between the different sections, but having a little symbol or having the percussion there helps to sort of hide those transition periods, really.
I think I did some for like synths as well, just so they have a bit of a like, just making sure each bit has like a natural end to them generally, and makes it a bit easier for if you're like heading out to play the rest of the game, really.
Yeah. Oh, my mistake. Sorry, we didn't use stingers. We used transition segments, I think. Yeah, play transition post exit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would make sense. And so it's again a kind of as you're looping around these different pieces, it's just kind of generatively creating these this musical moment as you're
No
hopping
Gen
through.
AI involved. Disclaimer. Sorry, you said the word like generative. I wanted to make that clear to people. So, sorry, I know exactly what you meant. Like,
Procedural?
I think it definitely. I mean, is it? Like, I wouldn't say like, because like procedural in my head would be like, you are setting the notes and kind of or whatever you need to do, and then that kind of like plays out. But
I think
like, it
generative is the right word. It's just been
is
co-opted a
generative,
bit
not like
recently.
just not the whole AI thing. No, don't worry. I know like what you meant.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
But it's a creation of the collaboration between the interaction and the system,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice. Well, and again, cool to hear it come from the early demo where it was very tonal. You know, clearly the intention was in place where you just had these drones as you're circling the different piles, and then as you moved forward in iterations, adding in the arpeggi, adding in these transition stingers. You know,
yeah,
this to me is like such a great illustration of, you know, starting with something, again, a great um, interaction that's musically based, and then building on that over time, again, as you're given the space to iterate and soak in it and embellish and polish it towards the final version.
yeah, definitely. Like, I think I remember this being one of like we were lucky that like I don't think there was like again there was like a lot of trust in like what we could like do in terms of like making the final product and like how our results haven't like changed too much. But from like the second video that you would have heard where like the arpeggiations were like quite low in range, like there was like a really good point made about how like there was a bit of like a, you know, limitation and kind of the feeling of it like being quite heavy whilst we wanted to have like a kind of like slightly lighter feel. So hence there was the idea of like bringing in just like different textures and rhythms and bits in places, which I feel like probably it ended up being a better result, I think, anyway.
Hmm.
And it seems like this just magically appeared, right? There was a gameplay element where the bird would attract to these piles and then circle on them as kind of a gameplay element. But was there any kind of, you know, how did that emerge, you know, as part of the iterative process of the music, right? Maybe what I'm
Yeah.
asking is like, so you woke up
Oh,
one
which came
day and
first?
the feature was in the game, and then you were like, cool, we're going to do something with that feature.
I think
Yeah,
that's
I
pretty
think
much
that
the way that
makes
it
sense.
happened. Like, I think they
Yeah,
made the tech first, and then they were like, let's add some cool sounds to this, I guess. They
yeah.
wanted to
I
have something
think
that you could kind of swing around a bit, like Hohokum. I think this was the kind of Hohokum mini bit of the game, let's say.
this is
Um,
the Hokum mini game, everyone. um, like without like it's funny saying that because like I would have mentioned like it as a reference, especially for some of the later music anyway, but I hadn't like initially intentionally looked into Hokum too much as a musical inspiration because I didn't want to just like ride off the
to rip it
training
off, yeah.
feathers of that and feeling of that. But then I had a friend who worked on the game being like, nah, do it. So I kind of got a nose in eventually. But yeah, I think like the part of the interactive element of it is one of the things that makes like games like this really fun for me. And yeah, it definitely made sense. Like, with most games, I would kind of spot through and see where there could be like opportunities to add that sort of thing anyway. So yeah, it would really just be like a matter of playing the game, seeing how it is kind of built, and kind of just going from there, really.
Yeah.
Mm,
And you're talking about a legacy, right? Like from Hohokam to Wilmots to Flock and into the future, there's a kind of visual aesthetic there from the developers. And I think super cool for them to reach into their history and, surface some of these gameplay. I don't think I'd call them a trope necessarily, but gameplay features of their previous releases. And I think nice to have that kind of homage and consistency in aesthetic as you are, part of that legacy that they're creating as part of the games that they're making. And I think that there's something really strong there. And of course, saying that I'm a huge fan of Hohokam, so like fun to hear that there is an acknowledgement of that history while also putting your own flavor to it, putting the flavor of Flock alongside of that as well. I think it worked
yeah.
out
Yeah.
really well.
Thank you. Yeah, it is wild, like coming from like, I would have remembered playing Hohokam in a friend's like living room as like one of the first like not exposures to like indie stuff, but just like outside like one of the first games I would have like played outside of like what like mainstream would be kind of considered sort of thing. And that would have been even before I considered like working in games. So yeah, it's a very weird but very good full circle sort of thing to be in the position I'm in, really. So
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, the
um
other vibe I had immediately talking about, comparisons is like Flower, the game
mm,
for
okay.
PS3 back in the day. You're flying around navigating, and of course a similar feeling of flight in that, and especially a game that came before that from one of the developers called Cloud, which was, again, I'm looking out over the landscape in Flock in the fog, and I'm just having flashbacks to these old independent games or, double A indies. Again, I'll invoke it again. Just a cozy experience that feels good, right? It's
Yeah, sure.
such a gift
um
to have those.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned like the game references because like most of the references I would have used would have been more like film like because you mentioned about Ghibli earlier and a few of the films would have been like go-to sort of things I looked into in terms of like inspirations towards like the quote unquote kind of feeling of flight as like Hayao Miyazaki would have like refer to like kind of depictions of flying and flight as like parts of his storytelling and like the really early ones like Nausicaa would be like the sort of things that would come to my mind with that sort of thing. And whilst like obviously it'll be very different in this sort of like setting, like those would like definitely be like the things I would think about myself when it comes to like flight feelings.
Yeah.
TM.
Yeah, the you just invoked the Nausicaa flight in me, and Castle in the Sky, of course, taking
Yes.
place entirely in light for the most part. it's a great touchstone, and again, delightful, cozy experiences. Okay,
For sure.
cozy's my new word.
New word of the day. Um, Move on. Like we've got like what have I got left to talk about? So I'm going to talk about um beast identification stuffs, and then we can go into the charming, which I know will have been in folks' heads, and then there's like a kind of chase segment that we have that kind of follows. That's kind of like I think the pattern of gameplay I think that we had overall.
Yeah.
Um, especially as we move towards like the more kind of quote unquote kind of like linear sort of like goal driven aspects of like the game. So you would have seen earlier in Dan's bit like going about the beast like segments is like part of the gameplay as you're like coming across these creatures for the first time would be like seeing how they're like identified, and there's like now kind of like a little interactive segment of getting to know the creature. So these are definitely more like linear kind of like compositions, although there was like some layers that we kind of had in terms of like um standby layers for like when you're just hanging out with the creature, and then when you're kind of going into like a little information sort of segment. And this was like when like talking about Hohokam stuff, this was like one of the tracks that I was like close to like embracing the kind of like sentimentality they had, or at least the times of like upbeatness they have, and also in terms of like being in the shoes of playing the game, like I feel like you would hear it a lot, and I don't feel like people want to get bored with it. And I'll specifically shout out like the synths that I used for the these sorts of stuff, which I think I would have mentioned about Yuhi, Repro, and the major like native instruments user with like Massive and FM8. I feel like there's when there is like a lot of synthetic stuff in block, though it does tend to be kind of like FM heavy in terms of the shape, and especially when it comes to building up the kind of more percussive elements of it. So with these segments that tend to be like synced to UI, I just kind of score a bit more to video. And if I'm composing more freely, I make a mock-up for myself and for Dan to show how I'd like things to be like implemented, as I've said before. And we kind of just figure out kind of a compromise from there. So like Dan, if you're up for showing the initial demo video, so this would be like an old kind of version
sure.
of it. So it should be the one that's called Beast ID.
Initial demo.
Yeah. So this would sound a bit more like bassy. There we go. Premix. There's a few shout out, I think, the names of some of these tracks, like the little like instruments I used. Especially Woodpecker in Massive. Shout out to that. But yeah, in the video, I've definitely like synced up things a lot more to UI, just because I found like a lot more fun in kind of like connecting that up. And then in the more like in the newer version of it, which I think is I don't think it's in that folder. It's in
Is it just this one, the new beast?
Yeah. So this would be like the newer version. I think like we considered like where else things would be played instead, in terms of like how things stop and start. So you can see like some bits of like the structure of the track has changed. I think it's just like basically figure out kind of like the compromise that I'm sure like we had to figure out between like me and Dan to set up. and especially in terms of what the programmers might have like set up as well. So we've had like, I think the end kind of segment trigger on when the menu comes down instead of just like when a creature appears, just to help with like the kind of transitional phase of that. I also like made little bits of extra indents when you have like a you finally formally like identify a creature as well, just to like add in some like extra texture as like a additional thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, so slow down that video that we just saw for me and talk me through like compositionally the pieces that are aligned with that experience, right? Starting from the, discovery of this new creature, the music starts up. Like uh, how does that evolve compositionally through
Mm.
the course of that, through to the, closing of the menu and continuing on your journey?
Yeah, I can definitely break this up. I might need your hand with this, Dan, if you can show this on your Wise friend, because I wouldn't have had prepped anything logic wise.
Yeah.
But basically, when we've got like a creature, we've got like initial little stinger as like an identifying sort of like um impact, and then the first when you're like, if you're like slowing down or like just pausing it, like just admiring this good little creature for a bit, you have got a bit more of like a nice kind of bassy sort of like synthy sort of like pad that plays in the background. I don't know if that's something you can play on its own, Dan.
Yeah, so we have like a little intro, which then goes into the main, this very chill one. I think as you get a bit more into the investigation side, this is when you're observing the creature, so you're just taking your time, it's relaxed.
Yeah, I
Then we
really
get into
like
naming
this
it.
bit.
Then
Yeah,
we get
the
into
naming
naming it, we
segment.
changed layers. Oh no, that's wrong. You can tell it's been a while. Layer
That's
2.
okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you got everything a bit more kind of like percussive. I kind of like the idea that it makes you go a bit more thinky in terms of like the kind of prompts that and Jane asks as well. And yeah, like it kind of like would just end from there, or just have like the little additional sort of like UI bits that
Yeah,
I would
and
have
that
added.
Yeah.
UI bit, like when that new creature does come into your guide, there's a little musical motif that happens. Is it aligning on the beat? Is it triggered?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So everything, we've got a few little triggers here and stingers. I'll kick it off again and play a few of them, just hopefully they'll work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I made the beast ones.
Yeah, so this was a collab, like in terms
Yeah.
of UI stuff. So the Dan made the first two sounds there, and then for the like final reveal, I like made the other one. Just thought it made kind of sense.
Yeah.
Um, I think yeah, all of them like embedded into like the music, I think really well.
They all
Well,
gel nicely, I think.
and that's it, right? Like you played the video, it happened. I know that there was way more to the simple representation that we saw, and clearly, you've created a system that follows the narrative of the player and their experience. It allows the music to evolve with their discovery phase, the education phase, and then all the way through to the arrival of that creature in the UI being synced musically, having that motif helping to illustrate that. And then of course just the smooth and natural transition back into gameplay, like just an orchestrated simplicity that has a kind of you know uh, humble complexity as well, right? But that is very much from and of the game and that navigation. Some questions coming in from the chat. Good to see you, Guido. Always a pleasure to have you. Did you use effect automation inside Wise for the music with events or transitioning?
No. if this is specifically about the music, then no. I think it's mostly just about stopping and starting things. I wasn't doing too much on the effect side of things with Wise and with the music. We're more sort of pre. I guess Ellie is like making the different sections, and then I'm figuring out how to link them all together in Wise and make them make sense from a sort of
Yeah, I think
gameplay
that's
perspective.
yeah, I think like layers are definitely like something I like to have like, as much control over as I can, like where
Yeah,
possible. And I usually like to like reiterate like whatever sort of textual changes I want from like the layers that we put out as well. So like I feel like if it were me like if it was me implementing, have a feel like I would just put like a subtle bit of like as in like I'll do like a little bit if it was me like controller, but like it's not like I think there's not much that needs to be done. I think in terms of like the
no,
processing of things, like I think like what is there has been like I think quite straightforward
Yeah.
and no frills, crossfade sort of transitional
yeah,
points.
Nice. We've got Gax in the chat saying it's all very seamless during gameplay, especially with the birds singing during charming. I know we're coming to this charming,
Talking about that next,
uh,
yeah.
and I just wanted to give a shout out because Guido also mentions that he uses the Actor Mixer for music as it
nice.
provides a certain tool for ambient generation. There's that word again.
Hmm.
Uh,
Mm.
but I
Yeah,
think
so
again,
sorry.
make a good case for different different applications for different reasons and no rules. Uh, so
Yeah,
cool.
I like that.
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
Cool. Should
Um,
we dive into charming? Shall
yes.
I play the? Have you got videos yourself, or shall I play one of the ones that I made?
Uh, yeah, it could be that like if you show the one you made first, and then I've got the one that I made.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
sure.
And
so
I'm prefacing this, if I may, by just saying that we're talking about gameplay elements that you've reinforced with sound as they've arrived, and this is uniquely a gameplay element that is sound based. And so maybe tee up this feature a little bit. Was this something that arrived again from the game developer, and how did it become so audio centric? Uh,
I think it was always their intention. 'Cause from the get-go, they had this idea of the bird singing to the creature to charm it, um, and everything kind of stemmed from that, really. I think the whole idea was about charming these creatures, persuading them to get into your flock. So yeah, I mean they kind of came up with the ideas, and then we figured out how to actually make it happen, I
excellent,
guess.
excellent. Thanks for the setup.
yeah, it's a pretty
Uh,
good. I think. Yeah, just what it like.
Sorry, Ellie, what are you saying?
Oh, I was just introducing the bit.
Okay.
Go for it. We can just
I suppose for context, it's almost a bit like a fishing game. Um, so you're trying to get these two side brackets to overlap with this one. That's like how near you are to being on track. The two sort of
yeah.
brackets. So that's something we did with the sound design as well. Is the closer you get to those being on target, there's a little synth layer in the background that will rise up, and you'll hear that sort of it become lighter and bolder the closer you are to that goal.
Yeah, a bit more, a bit closer. A little song. That was easy.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a professional.
Yeah, so good. So that's pretty much like the main approach to it, really. That was such a good sound, by the way. Whatever that was, the little guy who just yelled and
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, so I think like this was quite a straightforward sort of setup for me in terms of like there were kind of a couple of layers to consider with Charming. Like I made two versions of the track. So the version that you would have heard in this would be I think the most common version that everyone would hear, where it's like a bit like ambient, a bit like hypnotic, and we wanted to have like that kind of space to allow the kind of embellishments that you will hear whenever you try to like hit the goal of trying to like charm the bird. Um and then there's like another version that I developed later on where you're catching rare kind of like special creatures where like it'll be a bit more rhythmic, a bit more like kind of on it, you know. And especially since those are a bit more like, you know, once you catch these creatures, you've like progressed in the game or the story a bit more. I wanted to be like, you know, kind of significant in that way.
Yeah, they're
Um,
more sort of heavy story elements and heavier beats of the
yeah,
plot, so
so
they
like
had to be a bit more special music-wise as well.
heavy beats, heavy plot, you know.
Yeah.
um, if you
You can't
like,
really say that about Flock, really. It's not a
oh yeah, it's
heavy
quite
beat
light. I think
game.
I just had the alliteration in my
Those
head.
strong emotional moments.
Yeah. Dan, if you're up for like changing it to like just the demo I had,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
so this will
Charming
be in
demo.
Logic.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this is in a different key because I was trying to just export, but this would be like an example. I used a lot of like kind of FM synthesis based like drums for the more special rare creature version of the music. Had some of like the fundamental synths that you would have, all the sounds, like the little clary, like arpeggiations.
I'm not sure if you can still hear me. I think you probably can.
Yeah.
I think I
But
can now, yeah.
things are very much frozen on my end.
Oh no, I mean I can still
Across
hear
the
the
board.
audio.
Let's
Yeah.
try
Frozen, yes.
let's try unsharing and resharing and see how that
I
goes.
think it might just be my whole computer, which is really inconvenient
Exciting
for
is
sharing more
what it
bits.
is.
To be honest, it's been doing really well.
I know. I'm
Like
impressed it's
running
lasted this long.
everything. So, like,
What's best to
good.
do? I can try and restart and rejoin in a few minutes, or
That
if you've got the burgling build demos and stuff to show on your side, Ellie, maybe you can show those while I restart and rejoin, if that
I
works.
mean, I don't know how I would like kind of screen share on my end. Not that I'm like, you know, can do it. I think I'm just not.
go for the
And I
restart
don't
and
want to.
we'll vamp while you're gone. How's that sound?
Yeah, I'll
You can do
it
a little like
happens.
Q&A sort of thing.
I think I'm just gonna have to force this to shut down, which is kind of a
Oh,
novelty. So
That's beautiful.
wish me luck. I'll see you in a minute.
Good luck.
good luck, Godspeed, etc.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we're taking a break. Again, I think what's cool is taking this journey with you both. It's been we've been at it now a couple of good hours, and time flies when you're having fun. So
It's gone quick, really. So, but yeah, there will be like we'll have the charming to talk about. We've got a bit of like a chase segment, like talking about the chase, and like there's like a specific like to talk about that, like basically like when you're approaching these kind of like rare kind of special creatures, there is a bit of a segment where you kind of have to have like a cat and mouse situation. You got to like chase them and try to like tuck them out in numerous ways,
yeah,
and then try to like charm them into your flock. And you know, having these specific creatures will give you bonuses, like being able to like have more creatures in your flock and like that sort of thing as well. And there's some like numerous stages to that as well. So yeah, there's like four of them I think throughout the game where like there'll be different ones depending on like what kind of creature you're catching, and then there's like a final one that kind of like combines two kind of elements of stuff that I composed for the game. Like one's the kind of connected to like a standard chase structure, one is like kind of different, and I think that will be it. So I
great.
think we're almost there.
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking about specifically this this chase that you're talking about, and you're right. There's these moments in the gameplay where you are asked to find a creature of a certain type, and it starts with listening for and then looking for that creature, right? It's
Yeah.
so you need to use your ears to identify and find that creature, and then, like you said, the chase is on once you have approached and spotted, and now the music swells to support that chase. All of this just happening seamlessly as part of the gameplay, and then of course going into the next part, which is that charming piece of it, and sometimes you'll need to engage with that multiple times.
Yeah, I remember like playing when I was playing the game for like one of the first few times and trying to like catch the Emperor Cosmo. It was weirdly for me really tricky that I didn't expect it to. So there's like definitely like a few iterations of like having to at least try the catching. I think I from what I understand, there's a bit of like generosity in that like you don't necessarily have to like do the whole chasing again. You can just try and find like the creature again that appeared.
Yeah.
So
Okay, Dan's back. If we get the screen sharing back up, looking good. Awesome. Good recovery, Dan. I'll
that
bring
was
in
quick.
that was quick. I'll bring in a question from the chat as we position ourselves to check out this second charm illustration. But what was the approach to writing the charm whistle melodies?
The charm whistle melodies. Well, that was kind of like, Dan, can we hear you? I don't know if you. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sadly.
As a heads up. Just
somehow
whilst
audio
sorting.
didn't
Like,
get
I'm pretty
shared.
sure. So the little whistles are kind of connected to what I believe we were talking about earlier with the.
How about now?
Yeah. Hello.
We're back.
Yeah, you're peaking a little bit, I'll say. If you reduce a little bit.
How's that?
Good.
Might just have to live with it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I just need to reduce volume. It's cool. So yeah, we were just talking about charming, like bit of chase, a bit of charming, and I think somebody asked about composing the whistles for the game, and I was just saying like that was kind of connected to the bird stuff that we were trying to compose earlier on.
Yeah, it was quite circular, I think. We were kind of going around in a bit of a circle with it, where Ellie would write the music demos, then we'd record stuff with other Ellie, Bird Ellie, and then from that I'd edit that up to try and make it more sort of song-like and more in key. And then from that point, when we had the final song, then I'd mimic that with the little ocarina. So yeah, it was kind of a long process to get to the end point of the whistle, but the whistle was the last part. Great. Even though that's the thing that you use to train the creature, or to train the bird with.
Yeah, and we did do a little bit of that walkthrough earlier in the stream, so definitely jump back to some of the elements that you're talking about that we covered earlier.
Like it probably won't be in the demo that we were about to show, but there was also these little like extra sort of musical indents that I think I composed and added for like when I'm not sure whether it was when it was like specifically hitting a charm point, because I know you might have contributed some stuff, Dan, but I know that like I composed a bunch of like like numerous different results sort of stings.
Oh yeah. There's like different bits of text that pop up depending on how you do. So you could do good, great, okay, perfect, or uh-oh if you mess it up. So each of those had their own little sting and their own little effect as well.
But there's no messing up really. That's my failure in the grand
well,
kind
of if the creature escapes, you've kind of messed up a little bit.
Yeah, but then like they're not gonna like escape, but like you'll be able to get them eventually.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Failure is learning. Failure is good.
Yes. But yeah, if we can try another round of that demo, but this is more of like the background music of it. So different key, because that's how it was when I exported it. But yeah, a lot of FM8 synthesis drums for like the special feature version of the charming segment. And then after this, we'll have the kind of little synth RTPC layer that will kind of like fade in and out with like a little bit before in the gameplay, because it's a bit more nice and drained out. Yeah, so I think I just like set that up in a way to be a bit more like a crossfade sort of seamless loop. We're going to try and emulate it in Wise.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much that simple. We just had a couple of good old loops that we'd fade in and out depending on how close the player was getting to that sort of charming aim point or whatever. I don't know what the word would be. Accuracy, charm accuracy.
When you're charm accuracy.
Yeah, that's what we've called it in the game actually. That's the RTPC name, charm accuracy. Yeah.
Ah, there we go then. I should have noted that down myself. But yeah, I think the remainder of that demo, I think, just shows just like what we would have heard earlier in game. You basically like it would have just been a bit more stripped down, a bit more like chill and hypnotic to kind of allow things to come through a bit better in terms of like the little like kind of sound shoot offs that will happen as you're like trying to charm the creature.
That's great. Question coming in from the chat. Thanks, Junie, in advance. How do you coordinate each sound with the different environmental aspects? Asking because they always wondered how one knows how to time it specifically based on what their surroundings are. Like, is there an environmental component there?
Do you mean the beasts themselves and when the beasts are making their noises? Or
we'll see.
That's what it sounds like to me.
See if there's further comment on that.
I think in a similar way to the music, the programmers set up a sort of a little system that determined when beasts would bark or do their call. So it was almost in like a sort of a tiered ring system. So if beasts are closer to you, they're more likely to bark more frequently, and if they're further away, they're more likely to do a sort of a more sparse bark pattern or something. That's pretty much how we figured it out, because you always want to be able to hear these beasts calling as you're flying around, but you also don't want it to be overwhelming, and you also don't want to be like overloading Wise with events from every single beast all of the time. So yeah, they kind of came up with a solution which handled that for us in a way, and which hopefully sounds kind of quite naturalistic and real worldy, for as real worldy as you can get in a landscape like Flock.
We're getting a yes and a oh, and this idea of a game side creature bark conductor, right? So
yeah,
again,
exactly.
The game is in control. It understands, what's happening moment to moment. It can make these decisions about when and how often to, present these barks or chirps. Junie chimes in. It's interesting because in areas you hear faint chirps, they thought it was quite provoking. So,
that's good.
And I've
glad to hear it.
I've been with you in the chat. Those chirps are super charming, and again, add to the fauna or the creature ambience throughout. And again, systemically, you've got this this higher level conductor on the game that's really helping to make that the right level of detail depending on the player's environmental interaction.
I will say, so on another game I did, Alba, it's kind of a similar environment, but it's set on a Spanish island. And And in that, I don't think we had a conductor because it was a whole environment, a whole Spanish island, and the whole point of the game was to take pictures of all of the wildlife. So you had loads of different types of bird. Um, and for those, I think it was almost as simple as like a random container on each bird, but we'd limit how many could fire off at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and it was kind of that simple,
Yeah.
but seemed to work nicely enough with random timings and everything else that it just filled the space with bird calls in a way that wasn't overwhelming, but was clear enough that you could easily pinpoint where like the nearest bird was or one that you hadn't caught yet and zero in on it and find it.
Great. Great to get the behind the scenes on those kind of systems. And again, everything from the game side implementation of a bark conductor to just the simple solution of random containers with time silence or
Yeah.
variable delayed silence in between. Yeah.
That's very cool. Coming up to like I think like the last bit of what I had like planned to talk about. So we talked a little bit whilst Dan was away for a sec. I started talking a bit about like the creature chasing, which is like a nice kind of breakup of things in terms of like game progression and like once you kind of like complete an iteration of that, like game can like move on a bit. You even unlock a section of the game because we have a whole thing where you start off on this like little kind of mountain, like a little like area of the game, but then as you get a special creature each time, the more of the cloud falls over time, and you'll have more of the world to explore, which is really nice. But there's a specific one that I arranged, which was for like the very end, and it's definitely like spoilery if people haven't completed the game yet. But there's a specific chase where you'll finally kind of catch. You would have seen, I think, in one of the clips there was like a burgling bugle. That would have been like called out, and like that's like one of the creatures you have to like try and catch eventually, as they were like one of the main culprits from earlier. I'm going to talk a bit more like kind of like creatively about the music approach, because there was basically two thematic and structural references that I earlier established in the game, which kind of led up to this final kind of chase music. So firstly, there was like a bass kind of chord progression slash a dynamic structure that would occur during most of these like rare creature chases. And then if you're able to get the first part up, is it the it
Yeah, massively misclicked. Here we go.
not the Logic demo. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, not the Logic demo.
No, it was the next one.
Aha.
Sorry. So we're gonna just show what a standard rare creature chase looks like. And this was like me syncing two videos. So this would be roughly how it would be, I think, implemented in game.
Yeah. This is my template, what I would use to figure out how to put the music in the game in a way that works in Wise and works for the game.
Yeah, so we're kind of like, as well as like the text and documentation, we would have like, I would have videos like this made. So we've just had our first click of like the input colors minute as like the movement of the kind of chord progression, and a bit extra, and you have like a little bit of winds heard. Oh, there's even a little demo of the creature chase. I totally forgot that I had that there. But I think, yeah, that was just a whole demo of like how it all sounded. But yeah, that kind of demoed kind of the structure of things. So how it would start very minimal and ambient for the first part of this chase, and then a bit more beats in the next bit, and a bit more winds and textures in the later part, and like a similar kind of like chord progression. This isn't the next. If you can get the heist video up, Dan, the one that you recorded.
Oh yeah, sure.
Um,
Let's have a look.
so
And
this happens.
I love the way it all came together in that chase and charm video. Like we heard the music and that evolution. You know, there's a comment again from Junie. The synchronization within these areas is so spot on. They love it so much. You know,
Thank you.
it's working in a way that has a clear progression, right? As you're doing that, and the resolution of charming the creature is, you know, satisfying. And it all happens, you know, intermittently. How long is this going to take? And it naturally progresses, feeling great.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if it's something you can elaborate on, Dan, but we did have a thing where like if you fade out like over the game and then like come back in, like the music will kind of like fade out and then kind of like resume back depending on where you are, or maybe even resets.
Yeah, I think if you go, yeah, being an open world game, there was so many things like this that we sort of had to think about or figure out workarounds for, because the player can decide to just do whatever they want at any time, which is terrible for us as the people that have to deal with that. Um, but great for the player. So for a lot of these chases, we had this specific music that would be playing for the chase, and the simplest way that we could think of making it work is to make it spatial, basically.
Yeah,
If you drift too far away from this special creature that you're trying to catch, the music will become spatial, and you know you'll hear it off to the left if the creature's off to the left of you. And if you go far enough away, the creature will eventually despawn. So that'll stop the music and halt the chase music anyway, and then you'll have to go and find the creature again and restart the process. But yeah, having it spatial seemed like the best solution, really,
yeah. I think
because
we
you
had
don't know if
to.
the players like just maybe they've lost the creature. The whole point is that they're chasing it, so it's kind of a fine line between you don't want to stop the music just in case they haven't stopped searching for the creature, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
We
yeah.
also had to consider like different kind of customized versions of the chase depending on
Mm,
different goals of the creature that you're trying to catch. So there's like a later creature that turns invisible and you have to like try and like seek them out and the music kind of progresses and extends a bit more from that because I had a bit that took a bit longer than the
mm,
Cosmo did. And then we were talking about the skyfish earlier with the lots of layers, and that's like I remember like I think I composed a bunch of stuff for that, and then it ended up being like a bit more sting based, which was very okay. But that's a soundtrack only exclusive for the because I'm a completionist when it comes to
yeah.
soundtrack stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of different customizations and things to think about there.
Mm.
Yeah, so we
That
got
Skyfish one was an interesting one because it started off that we would have this music for the entire Skyfish chase, and each time the Skyfish moves, it moves to a new cave, and you have to go and track it down in its new cave and then grab it from there. But because it was moving so far away, the spatial side of things just wasn't working. Um, you'd just lose the music, and then you'd sort of re-find it again. And because each time you find it in a cave, you play a cutscene. I think eventually we decided, okay, the smoothest solution here is just to use the sound of the skyfish bellowing, so just the sound of its voice to track it down. That's how you track it down. And
Yeah,
then we'll use the music just for the cutscenes to make those have a little bit more punch and a bit more impact. And that
yeah.
seemed like a nice compromise.
nice,
A nice
nice.
sacrifice too. Sorry,
Yeah.
not bitter about it, I promise. I just found it I find it funny.
Well, it was that problem again where you just don't know what the player's intentions are, and if the
Yeah,
player
no,
has wandered
definitely.
off because they just genuinely can't be bothered to find the skyfish at that moment, we kind of have to accommodate that, and there's no way of knowing if they are sticking around to find it or not. So yeah,
The
that
frustration
was one where
is
we had to just sort of sacrifice the music slightly
the
Yeah.
frustration
for the greater
is
good, I
real.
think.
Right. So we've got Gax in the chat saying that this positionality of the music definitely helped with finding creatures during the chase.
Hmm.
This is ultimately what Junie was uh, getting at, you know, when they were asking about this relationship. And, you know, I think that this I'll say again, like simple conceit of taking something from being 2D to 3D is a feedback mechanism, right? It's this,
Exactly.
okay, so I'm fully immersed in this music, and now it's collapsing. What is that saying? What does that mean? How can I use that? Like, what does that give me as the player informationally to help me on the path that I'm on, right? And again, simple in some ways, but maybe not a logical reach for a lot of people to play with 2D and 3D as a feedback mechanism. So a really smart way to inform the player as part of this gameplay.
Yeah. I think that was the thinking, really, just to give them something extra to latch onto. If they were struggling to find the creature as well, they can just sort of, they can hear from the music where it might be located in the world, and it'll just sort of nudge them in the right direction. We had quite a large attenuation on it, so that it wasn't too much of a nudge. They would have to still search for it, but they'd start to hear if they were going too far off track.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So yeah, so just like quickly like summarizing like this kind of lead up to this final chase, I got like a chord progression and dynamic structure from what we just watched, the Emperor Cosmet. And now there's another bit where there's some little bits of more thematic inspirations and things that I took from the creature that we're focusing on. So we've got a bit more of like a chaotic and cheeky energy in this one. We've got like a bit of a cutscene where basically we've got a bunch of burgling mules, the quote unquote antagonists, the cheeky guys, steal the whistles that you seek out later in the game. So it's funny because like this for me was like a little challenging to write for because I don't think I'm too good at making things quote unquote funny musically, but like calling back to like the sort of like animation references I'd watch like and just experimenting with instruments that'll typically be deemed as like a little goofy or like experimenting with pitch shifts sort of things and little syncs to the cuts because like this will be a cutscene, so this will compose a lot more linear, like a bit easier to compose for that kind of thing humorously as well. So yeah, this would make sense contextually for like the next bit of the video, but for now we can check this out if you're able to press play. Oh, so this is a different video, sorry Dan.
Oh, sorry, which one did you want to play?
Heist. Did you get a heist video that you made?
No.
Oh,
I
never
didn't.
mind.
Yeah.
I asked
Do you mean
yeah.
the very start of the game?
Yeah, so the bit where they
Ah.
whistles and stuff.
No, I have the chase. I don't have the heist.
Ah, okay, no worries. Um, just to like basically summarize, as I've said, like there's like some different sort of like instrumentations to kind of represent the builds and kind of like being a little bit cheeky, a little bit like silly in some places. And basically those points kind of came all together in this chase segment in the video that we're about to show, where like I would have that establishing sort of like track calling back to that segment to start with, and then later on it would go on to like feel a bit more like an authentic kind of chase scene that you would have like when playing the game, and there'll be like some nice little references to the like chord progressions, and it's a bit more like amped up and lively.
I was just going to say I didn't grab a video, but we do have the music we can play a little bit of if you want to sort of reference back to it. It's definitely cheeky.
Yeah. Xylophones help.
But yeah, should we jump to the final chase and see how that progresses?
Okay.
Hey!
I forgot about that text dialogue. Or maybe that didn't happen. You've got that first little bit of the chase, like the fight for like an hour and got a quite a nod. Here we go. So glad I put in that little bit.
Perfect.
But yeah, we've got like so just like like it's nice to kind of like refer back to little bits of the earlier parts of the game, and it kind of makes things like feel a bit more kind of like conclusive as well. And I wanted to make sure that like that the chase is fun. We don't like there's no like bad faith sort of thing going on there. It's just a bit of um like a cheeky sort of chase sort of thing. So we wanted to be like feel like a bit of a good time still, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fun like trying to think of like ways to like kind of like balance and compromise of the sort of melodies and harmonics I had already from that kind of chord progression, and kind of integrating it a bit more with like the earlier stuff I had that kind of represented the burgling views. And
Yeah.
yeah, then just like compose things a bit more linear like for the ending really. So
Kind of
Yeah.
self-referential in that the first heist happens quite early in the game, and then what
yes.
we just saw was towards the end, and
Exactly.
so it kind of closes the loop on this. Uh, Cheeky is a good word for it, but just like a lighter intention that runs throughout the game, and I love the way that you brought that back around to kind of yeah make that consistency across. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if there was anything you wanted to show on Wise, Dan, but I think it might be just another straightforward sort of deal. I think it's just combining different elements of the
Yeah. Well,
dynamic stuff,
there
and
was
there's also
one
the
little.
transition stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say there's the transition to the cutscene in this, which was a bit of a just it's not super complicated, but something a little bit extra that we had to sort of think about is because you can transition from the last section of this into that final cutscene at any moment in the music. So we
Yeah,
just had this little system set up where each time the key changes, I tell Wise that the key has changed, so that we can go to a different end section of the music depending on when we are in the track. But yeah, that's as complicated as it gets for this particular bit of music.
And that post event on the timeline is setting a different state
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
music
Yeah. So
system.
setting a state. Yeah.
Cool, cool. That's a
yeah.
great way to do
Have
it.
to consider loading times. That was something to think about.
Yeah. I think that might be it. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm down to the bottom of my notes. We did it. So yeah, that pretty much I think covers I think most things we'd want to talk about.
Well, it's
Yeah. If anyone stuck it through the whole thing, congratulations. I was worried that we weren't going to have too much to talk about. I can't believe it's been 2.5 hours or something. But
Yeah, we had a good bunch to talk about. It was
well,
cool.
there's a lot there, and clearly a game that was able to grow throughout its development alongside the developers. You know, as you mentioned, being in early, being iterative, having some time to grow these systems as they were emerging. And we've seen so many illustrations of how, starting with even linear representation in a gameplay capture to first implementations all the way to the final, this iterative uh, approach to these systems has resulted in something that absolutely matches the game. It's been a really cozy time here with the two of you talking about the development of audio in Flock. Um, we do have a few folks still sticking around, and
Yeah.
thanks are pouring in for all of your work. So well done today
Thank
sharing that with the community out there who is interested in understanding more about the process. You've done a great job exposing that for people and yeah, making it a little more cozy.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, so this has been Wise Up on Air with Ellie and Dan behind the sound and music of Flock. If you're into these kind of things, subscribe and like over on our Twitch or YouTube channels. We've got other cool developers that we'll be featuring in the future and near future. And we've done a bunch of these. So dig back into the archive of Wise Up on Air developer live streams and hope to see you again in the future. Dan and Ellie, thanks again for sharing your time and experience.
No worries at all.
No worries.
All right. And folks in the chat, thanks for keeping us company and sending over great questions. It's great to have you here today. We'll catch you next time. See you
Amazing.
later.
Take care. Bye-bye.